The envelope was already open when Chiamaka found it. She stood in the hallway of her own house, coat still on, keys in her hand, staring at the torn flap of the envelope that had been sitting on the kitchen counter sealed when she left for work 6 hours ago. Inside, it was a letter from the fertility clinic. The one they had been waiting 3 months for. The one that would tell them whether the second round of IVF had worked. Her husband, Tobana, was sitting at the kitchen table with his back to her. His shoulders were very still. She said his name. He did not turn around. She walked to the table, picked up the letter and read it. It had worked. 2 embryos, both viable. They were going to have twins. She looked at her husband's back, at the particular stillness of a man who has read something and not yet decided what to do about it. Toby. He turned then, and she saw it immediately. Not joy, not relief, something else entirely. An expression she had never seen on this man's face in 9 years of marriage and did not have a name for until it settled, and she recognized it for what it was. Guilt. She set the letter down very carefully on the table. "Tell me," she said. And that was where everything began to fall apart. Chiamaka Ez was 37 years old and had spent the last 4 years of her life trying to become a mother. She was a corporate lawyer at one of Lagos's most aggressive firms, the kind of woman people described as formidable without meaning it as a compliment. She had grown up in Enugu, the second of 5 children, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who arrived and disappeared in cycles, leaving behind each time a little less of himself until one day he simply did not come back. She had decided at 14 that she would never need anyone the way her mother needed that man. That she would build a life so solid, so completely of her own making, that dependency would never find a foothold. She had succeeded, almost completely. The one thing she had not accounted for was love. Tobana had arrived in her life at 31, quiet and steady and sure of himself in a way that did not need performance, and she had fallen before she knew she was falling. They married within 18 months. She had thought she was choosing strength again, a different kind, but still strength. She had not understood then what she understood now, sitting at this table looking at her husband's face, that the most dangerous love is the one that makes you believe you are finally safe. Tobana Ez was 41. He ran a mid-sized construction company that his father had built from nothing and that he had grown into something considerable. He was, by most visible measures, a good man. He coached football with the boys in the compound on Sunday mornings. He called his mother every day without being reminded. He had sat in 4 different doctors' offices over 2 years of fertility treatments and held Chiamaka's hand through every procedure without flinching. He had cried with her after the first IVF failed, held her hair when the hormones made her sick, driven her to the clinic at 5 in the morning more times than he could count. He was also, for the past 11 months, sending money to a woman named Adana. Monthly, consistently, without explanation. This was his secret. This was the thing the open envelope had shaken loose in him, not because the letter itself contained his secret, but because the moment he read that his wife was carrying 2 children, the arithmetic of his life had suddenly become impossible, and he had sat there for 2 hours unable to move. His core motive was not cruelty. That was what made him morally gray and not simply a villain. His motive was fear. A specific, deep-running fear that had its roots in watching his own father run a construction empire and 2 households simultaneously, not out of greed, but out of a cowardice so practiced it had calcified into habit. Tobana had grown up watching his father love 2 women and destroy both. He had sworn he would never do the same. And then, in the way that swearing against something sometimes makes you vulnerable to it, he had done something adjacent. Not an affair. Something more complicated. Something he had told himself was not betrayal because he had never touched Adana that way, had never wanted to, had simply found himself entangled in a debt of conscience that he did not know how to untangle without destroying everyone. The secret he had carried for 11 months was this: Adana Akaffer was pregnant, and the child was not his. The child was his younger brother's, his brother Emeka, who had gotten Adana pregnant and then fled to Canada rather than face it, calling Tobana at 2 in the morning in tears and begging for help. Tobana had agreed to send money until Emeka could sort himself out. 11 months later, Emeka had sorted nothing. Adana had a 4-month-old baby. And Tobena had been lying to his wife by omission every single month when the transfer cleared. He had told himself it was not a lie. He had told himself it was family business. He had told himself that he would tell Chiamaka soon, when the timing was better, when Emeka was ready, when things were less fragile. The timing was never better. Now his wife was carrying 2 children and looking at him across the table with eyes that already knew something was wrong, and the timing had run completely out. Adana Akefer, Chiamaka said. He went very still. I have been seeing that name on our joint statement for 11 months, she said. Her voice was the voice she used in court, level, precise, giving nothing away. I told myself it was a supplier. I told myself I would ask you about it when things were less stressful. I told myself a lot of things. She paused. Tell me who she is. This was the first collision. And like all the most devastating collisions, it did not announce itself with noise. It arrived in the silence of a man who could not turn around and a woman who was already reading the answer in the shape of his back. Tobena told her the truth, all of it. He told her about Emeka's call, about the agreement, about the money. He told her he had never been with Adana. He told her this was his brother's child and his brother's failure, and that he had been trying to protect his family on both sides without breaking anything. Chiamaka listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You let me go through IVF thinking I was the only person in this family trying to bring a child into the world. You held my hand in that clinic. You watched me inject hormones into my own stomach for weeks. And you were sending money every month to a woman carrying your brother's baby, and you said nothing. I didn't think. No, she said. You didn't, that's exactly right. She picked up her keys and her bag, and she left the house. She drove to the one person she always drove to when the world went sideways. Her best friend of 22 years, Ngozi Ademi. Ngozi was the helper in this story, though helper is too simple a word for what she was. She was 40 years old, a therapist in private practice, the kind of woman who had spent so long helping other people carry their pain that she had developed a precise and almost uncomfortable ability to see through the stories people told themselves. She had a backstory built on loss. She had lost a pregnancy at 6 months, 6 years ago, an experience that had quietly restructured everything she understood about grief and love, and the way humans protect themselves from both. She was unmarried by choice, not circumstance, and had made that choice so deliberately and so completely that people who did not know her well sometimes mistook her contentment for loneliness. What people who did not know her missed was that Ngozi had once wanted the whole thing. The husband, the children, the ordinary domestic life. She had wanted it with a quiet intensity she had never shown anyone because the wanting felt dangerous. It felt like the kind of desire that could be used against you. She had watched her own mother pour everything into a family and emerge from it at 60 with hands that shook and a heart that had given out more than it had received. She had decided young that she would hold something back, that she would be generous but not depleted, available but not consumed. The pregnancy loss had broken that careful architecture, not destroyed it, but broken it enough that light got in, and some of the light was grief, and some of it was longing, and some of it was a reckoning with the fact that holding back had not protected her from loss. It had only meant she had lost something alone. She had rebuilt herself after that, differently, more honestly. The private practice was part of that rebuilding, a way of being useful to people in pain, without becoming invisible inside their pain, the way her mother had become invisible inside the family's pain. Her secret was that she had been in love with Tobena once. Briefly, before he and Chiamaka got together, a period of about 3 months where something had flickered between them at a party, and then been quietly extinguished when Chiamaka entered the picture and Tobena's attention shifted with the totality of a man who has just found the thing he did not know he was looking for. Ngozi had let it go completely, and without drama, had actively supported their relationship, had been maid of honor at their wedding. The love, such as it was, had transformed itself into something that looked like friendship and mostly was. But there was a residue, not longing exactly, more like a very old and very quiet awareness that she kept in a part of herself she did not visit often. Her emotional flaw was this. She was so skilled at helping people process their feelings that she had become expert at processing her own feelings away entirely. She mistook analysis for healing. She could explain her own wounds with such clinical precision that she had never actually sat in them long enough to let them close properly. When Chiamaka arrived at her door that evening, eyes dry and jaw set, and the letter from the fertility clinic in her hand, Ngozi made tea and listened and then said, carefully, "Before you decide what this means, I need you to hear yourself." "What does that mean?" "It means you came here knowing I would help you think through this. But you have already decided what you're going to do, and you want me to confirm it." Chiamaka looked at her. "You think I'm wrong to be angry?" "I think you're angry for the right reasons, and I think you're about to make a decision from the anger that has nothing to do with what you actually want." Ngozi wrapped her hands around her mug. "You are pregnant with twins, Chiamaka. 2 children you have been trying to have for 4 years. And the man who helped you make them just told you a truth he should have told you 11 months ago. Both of those things are real. You don't have to choose which one matters." "He lied to me." "He omitted." "Don't use your therapist voice with me." "I'm not using my therapist voice. I'm using my 22 years of knowing you voice." Ngozi set down her mug. "He did something wrong. He should have told you. But Chiamaka, you have been finding reasons to not fully trust this man since the day you married him, and I say this with love, because your father left and you have been waiting for Tobina to leave ever since." Silence. "That's not fair," Chiamaka said. "No," Ngozi agreed, "but it's true." Chiamaka left an hour later without having made any decisions, which was itself a kind of progress. She drove home slowly. Tobina was still at the kitchen table. He had not moved, which told her something about the quality of his guilt. Guilty men who are trying to manage outcomes move around. They cook dinner, they pour wine, they manufacture normalcy. Men who are genuinely undone by what they have done go still. She sat across from him. "I need to meet her," she said. He looked up. "Chiamaka." "Adana, I need to meet her, not to confront her. She hasn't done anything wrong. But I need to see the situation with my own eyes because right now I am constructing it in my imagination, and my imagination is not being kind." 3 days later, they drove together to Adana Akafer's flat in Lekki. Adana was 26. She opened the door in a loose dress, a baby on her hip, eyes that went quickly from Tobina to Chiamaka and stayed there, reading the situation with the alertness of a woman who has been managing a complicated situation alone for almost a year. She was the 4th character in this story, the betrayal, though like all the most interesting betrayals, hers was not clean. Her backstory was this. She had grown up in Wari, brilliant and ambitious, won a scholarship to study accounting, fallen in love with Emeka Ez at university, a man who was charming and unreliable in equal measure, and who she had told herself was growing up, was changing, was becoming the man she could see in him if she looked at the right angle in the right light. She had believed this for 3 years. When she fell pregnant, she had told him immediately, honestly, full of terrified hope. He had held her hand and told her everything would be fine. 2 weeks later, he had a flight to Canada. She had not heard his voice since. What Adana had done in the 11 months that followed was something she would never fully describe to anyone, because it did not fit neatly into any available category of experience. She had grieved the relationship, yes, but she had grieved it while simultaneously managing the physical reality of pregnancy, which does not pause for grief. She had told her mother. Her mother had come for 3 weeks and then gone back to Wari because there were other children and other responsibilities, and her mother's love was real, but it was also stretched thin across 5 children in 4 cities. She had told 2 friends who were sympathetic in the way that people are sympathetic when they do not know what else to offer. She had told her employer that she was a single mother, said it clearly and without apology in the way that requires a specific kind of courage, and had kept her job. She had built a life, a small, careful, functional life, and she had accepted Tobina's money not with gratitude exactly, but with the recognition of a woman who has been forced by circumstance to accept help and has chosen to do so without shame, which is its own form of strength. Her secret was darker and more complex than any of theirs. She had known about Chiamaka for the entire 11 months. Emeka had told her about his brother's wife, the lawyer, the one trying to get pregnant, and Adana had known from the first transfer that accepting Tobena's help meant she was part of something his wife did not know about. She had told herself it was not her responsibility to manage another woman's marriage. She had told herself that Tobena was a grown man making his own choices. She had told herself a great many things. Her emotional flaw was a pride so deeply embedded she had mistaken it for self-sufficiency. She did not ask for help. She did not show weakness. She had been abandoned by the man she loved, and she had responded by constructing a self that needed nothing from anyone, which meant she was raising a child in an isolation she refused to name as loneliness. When Chiamaka walked into her flat and sat on the sofa and looked at the baby, something happened that none of them had prepared for. Chiamaka reached out and touched the baby's hand. The baby grabbed her finger. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Chiamaka said, "What is her name?" "Chisum," Adana said. Chiamaka nodded slowly. She looked at Tobena, then back at the baby, then at Adana. "How long has he been gone?" 11 months. "Has he called?" Adana's jaw tightened. "No." Another silence. Then Chiamaka said something nobody in the room expected. "I'm going to need you to understand that I am not your enemy. What happened here is not your fault, and it's not mine. It belongs to two men who handled things badly. One of them is sitting behind me and will hear everything I'm about to say." She looked at Tobena. "And the other one needs to come home and face what he created." This was the second collision, not a confrontation between Chiamaka and Adana. A united front between two women pointed at the actual source of the damage. Tobena called Emeka that night. Chiamaka sat beside him and listened to every word. The phone was on the table between them on speaker, which was Chiamaka's idea, and which Tobena had accepted without argument because he understood correctly that this was not negotiable. Emeka answered on the fourth ring. His voice was cautious, in the way of someone who has been expecting a call they have been dreading. "Brother," Tobena said. "Tobai," a pause, "is everything okay?" "No," Tobena said. "Nothing is okay. Your daughter is 4 months old and has never heard your voice. Your girlfriend has been raising her alone in a flat in Lekki. I have been sending money every month to cover what you left behind. And my wife, who has been going through IVF for 2 years, just found out about all of it because I was too much of a coward to tell her." Silence on the line. The kind of silence that has texture, shame, pressing against the glass of it from the inside. "Emeka," Tobena's voice dropped. "She is your daughter, not mine, not anyone else's. Yours, and you are going to come home and face this, or I am going to come there and bring you home myself." More silence. Then Emeka said, in a voice that was smaller than Tobena had ever heard from him, "I don't know how to be a father." "Nobody does," Tobena said. "You figure it out." "What if I—" "Emeka," Chiamaka's voice cut in. She had leaned forward and was speaking directly at the phone now. "This is Chiamaka. I am pregnant. I am 4 years older than I wanted to be when I had my first child, and I am terrified every single day. Your brother is terrified. I am terrified. Fear is not an excuse. It is just a feeling you have to walk through. Come home." The line was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Tobena looked at the phone to check the call was still connected. Then Emeka said quietly, "Okay." He booked a flight 3 days later. But the story was not finished. Because in the 2 weeks between that phone call and Emeka's return, something happened that none of them had anticipated. Ngozi happened. She had been processing the situation in the background the way she always processed things, systematically, analytically, with a clinical distance that she called perspective, and that was actually, if she was honest with herself, avoidance. She had been Chiamaka's sounding board, her voice of reason, her steady presence through each new development. She had been, as always, helpful and measured and entirely present for someone else's crisis. And then one evening Tobena called her. Not about Chiamaka, not about Adana or Emeka or any of it. He called because he was sitting alone in the house, his wife having gone to her mother's for the night, and he was looking at the fertility clinic letter on the table, and feeling something he could not name, and he called the person he trusted most in the world outside of his wife. Which was Ngozi. They talked for 2 hours, about fear, about fatherhood, about the way his own father's choices had haunted him and shaped him and ultimately failed to protect him from becoming someone who made his own version of the same mistakes. He talked about Chiamaka, about how afraid he was that she would look at him differently now, that some fundamental trust had been cracked that he did not know how to repair. He talked about the twins, about what it meant to be about to become a father to 2 children, when he was still not sure he had figured out how to be a husband. Ngozi listened. She said the right things. She was, as always, excellent at this. And when she hung up the phone, she sat in her flat for a long time in the dark and allowed herself to feel the things she had been analyzing away for 9 years. Not love exactly. Not anymore. But something. A grief for a version of a life that had not happened, that she had convinced herself she did not want, that she had been so careful and so skilled about not wanting that she had never properly mourned. She cried, properly, for about 20 minutes. Then she washed her face and made a decision. She called Chiamaka the next morning. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to hear it from me before you hear it from somewhere else or piece it together yourself, because you will piece it together yourself eventually, and I would rather you know I told you willingly." Chiamaka was quiet, waiting. She had the quality of stillness in these moments that she had developed in the courtroom, the ability to receive information without immediately responding to it, to let it settle before deciding what it meant. "Before you and Tobina got together," Ngozi said, "there was a moment, brief, nothing happened. But there was a moment, and I never told you because it passed so quickly it seemed irrelevant, and because he chose you immediately and completely, and I made peace with it." She paused. The pause cost her something. "He called me last night, just to talk, nothing else. I need you to know that. But after I hung up, I realized I had been carrying something I should have put down a long time ago, and I am putting it down now by telling you." The silence on Chiamaka's end was the most frightening silence Ngozi had ever sat in. Longer than seemed reasonable. Longer than felt survivable. Then Chiamaka said, "How brief." 3 months, before you, nothing physical. Just something in the air at a party that neither of us ever acted on. And last night. Last night was your husband in pain calling someone he trusts. That's all it was. I am telling you because I don't want there to be anything between us that you don't know about. Not now. Not with everything else. Another long silence. "Ngozi," Chiamaka's voice was very controlled, the lawyer voice, but underneath it something else. "I am standing in my mother's kitchen right now, and I need you to give me a moment. Take as long as you need." The moment lasted 4 minutes. Ngozi counted. She sat on the edge of her bed and held the phone and counted and did not breathe properly for any of it. Then Chiamaka came back. "Did you want him?" she asked, direct, no preamble. "Briefly, 9 years ago. No, not now." "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Ngozi said. "I have been sure for a very long time, and I chose not to examine why I was so certain because the examining felt dangerous. Last night I examined it. The answer is no. He is your husband. He loves you. That has always been completely clear." "Then why are you telling me this now?" "Because," Ngozi said, and her voice cracked slightly for the first time in the conversation, "you are the most important person in my life, and everything around you is cracking open, and I refuse to be another thing you had to find out rather than be told." This was the third collision, not explosive, not loud. The quiet collision of 2 women who had built 22 years of friendship on honesty and were now testing whether that foundation could hold the full weight of the truth. It held. Not without damage. The conversation that followed was the hardest one they had ever had. Chiamaka cried. Ngozi cried. Things were said that were sharp and some of them were unfair, and Chiamaka knew they were unfair as she was saying them, and said them anyway because grief does not always arrive with good manners. Ngozi received them without flinching, and without retreating, and without deploying her therapist's tools as a shield, which was the most vulnerable she had been in years. She just sat there and took it and stayed, and that staying, more than anything she could have said, was what saved them. At one point, Chiamaka said, "Did you ever tell me because you wanted what was mine?" Ngozi said, "No." "How do I know that?" "You don't, not logically. You know it because you know me. And I think you do know me. I think that's why this is so hard, because if I were someone you didn't fully trust, it would be simpler." That was true. Chiamaka sat with that for a while. "I need time," she said finally. "Take it," Ngozi said. "I am not going anywhere." "I know," Chiamaka said, and that was the beginning of the repair. By the end of 2 hours, something had shifted. Not repaired, but shifted in the way of things that have been broken and are beginning, carefully, to consider the possibility of being rebuilt differently. Both women were exhausted in the particular way that honesty exhausts, not depleted but scoured clean. Like something that has been washed too hard and is raw but finally actually clean. Chiamaka went home to Tobina that evening. She sat across from him at the kitchen table. The same table. The letter still there because neither of them had moved it. It had become a kind of landmark between them, the artifact of the moment before everything opened up. "Ngozi told me," she said. He closed his eyes briefly. "I know. She called me after she called you." "You're not surprised?" "I've known Ngozi a long time. She was always going to tell you. That's who she is." Chiamaka looked at him. At this man she had chosen and doubted and needed and resented and loved in varying intensities for 9 years. She thought about her father. About the way she had been waiting, braced, for Tobina to become her father. About what Ngozi had said to her weeks ago, that she had been finding reasons to not fully trust since the day she married him. She had been angry when Ngozi said it. She was less angry now. Anger is easier to sustain than self-examination, but it is also less useful. She thought about the twins growing quietly inside her. 2 daughters she did not yet know. 2 people who would arrive in this world and find it already complicated and full of the residue of other people's choices, and have to make sense of it and make their own choices on top of it. That was what inheritance was. Not just the good things. The whole architecture of what the people before you built and broke and patched and tried again. She put her hand flat on the table between them. "I am not leaving," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I am not leaving and I am not making you leave. We are going to have 2 children and we are going to figure out how to be parents and we are going to deal with Emeka and Adana and Chisholm as a family because that is what this is now whether any of us planned it." She paused. "But I need things to change, not just the secrets. The instinct toward secrets. The part of you that sees something difficult and decides to manage it alone rather than bring it to me. That is what broke something. Not Adana, not the money, the decision to carry it alone." Tobina looked at her hand on the table. He put his over it. His hand was warm and heavier than she expected, though she had held it thousands of times. Everything felt reweighted now. "I know," he said. "Tell me you know." "I was so afraid of becoming my father that I didn't notice I was making his kind of choices. Quietly, for different reasons, but still quietly. And I'm sorry, Chiamaka, not a managed sorry, a real one." "What's the difference?" He thought about it. A managed sorry is shaped around what I want you to do next. A real sorry is about what I actually did and the fact that it was wrong regardless of the outcome. He looked at her. "This is the second one." She held his hand tighter. They sat like that for a while. Outside, a generator somewhere on the street hummed into life, the Lagos soundtrack, so familiar it had become invisible. Inside the kitchen, the refrigerator made its small sounds. Everything ordinary, everything changed. Emeka landed on a Thursday morning. Tobina picked him up from the airport alone. They drove in near silence for 40 minutes, the kind of silence that exists between brothers who know each other well enough that words are almost redundant. Lagos traffic moved around them in its usual chaotic symphony. At one point, a Danfo bus cut in front of them and Tobina braked, and Emeka grabbed the dashboard, and they looked at each other and almost laughed, and then did not laugh because this was not a day for laughing yet. Before they arrived, Emeka said, "Is she going to let me see her?" "That's not my question to answer," Tobina said. "Is Adana?" Angry, Tobina glanced at him. "What do you think?" Emeka looked out the window. He was 34 and looked younger, the particular youth of someone who has not yet been forced to grow up by anything that mattered. He had their father's features, sharper, more volatile, and their father's habit of charm as deflection. But sitting in the passenger seat of his brother's car, he looked stripped of the charm entirely. He looked like someone who had spent 11 months running from something and had finally, reluctantly, stopped and turned around and was only now seeing how far he had run. "I don't know how to start," he said. "You start by showing up," Tobina said. "That's all. You show up and you don't make it about your feelings. Her feelings first, the baby first, your feelings last. That's how you start. And if she doesn't want me there, then you accept that and you come back tomorrow and you try again. Being a father is not a single conversation, Emeka. It's every day. It's showing up every day even when you don't know what you're doing, especially when you don't know what you're doing." Emeka was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You sound like you've thought about this." "I'm going to be a father in a few months," Tobina said. "I have thought about nothing else." Adana opened the door when they arrived and looked at Emeka for a long time. He looked back at her. Neither of them spoke for several seconds that felt much longer. The baby was asleep in the other room. The flat was quiet. The air between them carried everything 11 months of silence accumulates, all the unspoken things thickening into something almost physical. "Come in," Adana said finally. She did not say it warmly. She said it the way you say something you have decided to say, because the deciding is the brave part, and the warmth can come later if it comes at all. But she said it. She opened the door wider and stepped back, and that stepping back was a choice, and they both understood what it cost her. Emeka walked in. Tobina stayed at the door. "I'll be outside," he said. He sat on the steps for 2 hours while whatever needed to happen inside happened. He did not listen. He looked at his phone. He answered 3 work messages. He called Chiamaka once to say he was there, and she said good, and they stayed on the line for a few minutes without talking, which was its own kind of conversation. He looked at the street. He thought about his father. He thought about the choices people make not from malice, but from fear, and how fear, left unexamined, produces damage that looks exactly like the damage made from malice, and how the people on the receiving end cannot always tell the difference and perhaps should not be expected to. He thought about the fact that he himself had made fear-based choices for 11 months and had sat in fertility clinic waiting rooms holding his wife's hand and felt the specific hypocrisy of a man who shows up completely in one place and hides completely in another. He had not wanted to be that man. He had become that man anyway. The gap between who we want to be and who we become in the private moments when nobody is watching, that gap is where character is actually determined. He had learned this the hard way and was still learning it. When the door opened and Emeka came out, his eyes were red in a way that told Tobina the conversation had gone to real places, not the managed places, the real ones. He sat on the steps next to Tobina and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "She let me hold her." "Chisholm." "Yeah." His voice was rough with something Tobina recognized as the specific emotion of holding your child for the first time, which he had not yet experienced himself, but which he had heard described and was now watching move across his brother's face. "She grabbed my finger." Tobina said nothing. He thought about Chiamaka telling him that story, the baby grabbing Chiamaka's finger. The way connection arrives sometimes without permission, through the smallest possible point of contact, bypassing all the complicated architecture of adult decisions and just happening, simple and irrevocable. "I'm staying," Emeka said. "I'm going to stay and figure it out." "Good." "I don't know if Adana will ever," he started again. "I don't know if she can forgive me, she didn't say, but she said she would not keep Chisholm from me if I showed up consistently. Those were her exact words, consistently." He looked at his hands. "She made me say it back to her, consistently. What that means, what it looks like, what happens if I fail. And I said it, and I meant it." He paused. "I think for the first time in my life I meant something completely." Tobina looked at him, at his brother, at the 34-year-old man sitting on a stranger's steps in Lekki with red eyes and a new weight on him that had not been there 11 months ago, and that would probably never fully leave. He thought about how people grow, how it is almost never clean, how it almost always requires something being broken first. "I'm proud of you," Tobina said, simple, direct. Emeka looked at him. "For what?" "I ran away." "For coming back," Tobina said. "Running is easy, coming back takes something." They sat on the steps until the sun started going down over Lekki, and the street filled up with the end-of-day sounds of a city that never fully quiets, the generators and the hawkers and the distant music and the specific aliveness of a place that refuses to be still. Then they got in the car and drove home. The weeks that followed were not neat. Real life after real crisis is never neat. Chiamaka had days when the anger came back, and she did not know where to put it. Tobina had days when he caught himself managing rather than communicating and had to stop and start again. Ngozi and Chiamaka rebuilt slowly, carefully, with the specific attention of women who understand the value of what they are working with. Adana went back to work. She hired a childminder. She accepted Emeka's presence in increments, not out of forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness was a longer journey than 11 months of abandonment could be undone in, but out of pragmatism, and underneath the pragmatism, something else. Something she was not yet ready to name. Emeka showed up, every day, not perfectly, but consistently, which was all anyone had asked of him. And Chiamaka, 7 months later, gave birth to 2 daughters. They named the first one Ada, after Chiamaka's mother. The second one they named Ngozi. When Ngozi held her namesake for the first time in the hospital room, she laughed. Then she cried. Then she looked at Chiamaka and said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Chiamaka said. "That's why I did it." Tobina watched his wife and her best friend in that hospital room and felt something settle in him that had been loose for a very long time. Not resolution exactly. Not the clean ending of anything. More like the feeling of a foundation that has been tested and cracked and repaired imperfectly and is now, despite everything, holding. He had not become his father. He had come close. He had made the kind of quiet, cowardly choices that were his father's signature. But he had also, when it mattered, told the truth. He had also sat on the steps of a woman's flat for 2 hours while his brother faced something he had created. He had also held his wife's hand in clinic after clinic, year after year, without flinching. He was not a good man who had done a bad thing. He was not a bad man who occasionally did good things. He was what most people are if they are honest about it, somewhere in the complicated middle. Trying, failing, trying again. That was the thing about this family. They kept trying. 3 months after the twins came home, Chiamaka sat at the kitchen table one evening after they had gone to sleep. Tobina was in the other room. The house was quiet in the way it is quiet when children are in it, a different silence than before, fuller, more alive with the possibility of noise. She picked up her phone and called Adana. "How is she?" she asked when Adana answered. "Teething," Adana said. "Miserable." Chiamaka laughed. "Both of mine too. There must be something in the air." A pause. Then Adana said, "How are you?" "Tired," Chiamaka said. "Happy, both." "Yeah," Adana said. "Both, that's exactly right." They talked for 20 minutes. About Bobby's and sleep and the particular madness of the first year. Not about Emeka, not about Tobina, not about any of the difficult, complicated history that sat underneath the conversation like bedrock. Just 2 women talking about their children. Finding, in the most ordinary possible subject, the first small thread of something that might, given time and patience, and the kind of grace that does not arrive all at once, become something real. When they hung up, Chiamaka sat for a moment in the quiet. Then she got up, walked to the room where Tobina was sitting, and sat next to him. He put his arm around her without looking up from what he was reading. She leaned into him. Outside, the window Lagos was doing what Lagos always does, loud and relentless and entirely indifferent to the private lives of the people inside it. Inside this house, 2 Bobbies were sleeping. Inside this house, 4 people had told each other the truth at great cost and were still, improbably, intact. Inside this house, a marriage that had been tested to the edge of what it could hold had found, just at the edge, that it could hold more than either of them had known. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. If this story held you from the beginning to right here, right now, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me which character you felt most deeply. Chiamaka, Tobena, Ngozi, or Adana. Because I think depending on where you are in your own life, a different one of them is going to hit differently. And I want to know which one it was for you. If someone in your life needs to hear a story about truth and what it costs and what it builds when you finally tell it, share this with them today. Sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone is put a mirror in front of them that does not flinch. And if you are new here, this is what we do. We tell the stories that matter. We go deep. We do not look away. Subscribe so you are here for the next one because it is coming and it is not going to be quiet. Like this video if it stayed with you. It takes 2 seconds and it means more than you know. See you next time.